As the whole world knows by now, Donald Trump is headed back to the White House. Already, his team is well into planning the transition. In this video, we'll talk about what it means for American democracy, the lessons for the Democrats Party, the blame game they have to work through before learning those lessons, the fault lines in America that remain, and some predictions for what happens next. For half of the American population, what happened last week almost certainly fell into their definition of their nightmare scenario. Actually, America managed to dodge the real nightmare scenario, you could say, against all the polling and against the odds. Because in terms of the health of the democracy, the nightmare scenario was really for an intensely close result, the resolving of which would take weeks, with legal challenges and conspiracy theories flying around the place in the meantime, which would have ended whichever side won, with a large proportion of the losing side believing passionately that the election had been stolen from them and was therefore illegitimate. The collapse of democracy begins with the loss of faith in its institutions, its processes, and of course its outcomes. In the event, the result was clear and unambiguous, which, even if you didn't like the result, was a good thing. Trump won all the swing states, he won the popular vote, Republicans won the Senate, almost certainly going to win the House, no ifs, no buts. And there was another difference between this election and Trump's last victory in 2016. Because in 2016 there was a sense that it was almost accidental, a quirk of the Electoral College. People didn't really know that much about this brash outsider. This time, America knows exactly who Donald Trump is, and a bigger majority voted for him, including more women, more Latinos, more black people than had ever voted for him before. When Joe Biden went to his first international summit in 2020,
America is back.
He was arguing that Trump 2016 was an aberration and politics as usual was resumed. But he was wrong. Trump, whatever you think about him, has majorly shifted the political character of the United States in ways that are now likely to endure well beyond his coming term in office. Even if, and it is the most likely scenario, there's something of a backlash against some of the aspects of Trumpism by the time we get to 2028, much by then will have come to define how the US does politics. And by and large, the other leaders of the world know this. Trump will be taken more seriously by foreign leaders, including those who hate everything that he stands for. Last time, they too thought he was an accidental aberration, a clown who had wandered onto the wrong stage. This time, they know that he clearly represents the American people. In the meantime, the Democrats have to get over the reality of their crushing defeat and learn some lessons. It may be that this will be the event that finally buries wokeness and brings the left back into a more mainstream common sense area of political discourse. Arguably, it's a process that had already begun, as was evident by the tenor of the Harris campaign. But in total, it will take time. And in the meantime, they have to do the inevitable thing that politicians do in the aftermath of a big defeat: point fingers at each other and play the blame game. So according to insider accounts, the Harris and Biden camps are already furiously tearing lumps out of each other. Biden's top aides, Mike Donnellan and Steve Ricchetti, are being blamed for having had Biden run at all for a second term. Mike and Steve will have a lot to answer for, having him run for re-election at 80 years old, goes the quote. A member of the Harris team told Axios the 107-day Harris campaign was nearly flawless. The Biden campaign that preceded it was the opposite. Well, Biden staffers reportedly hit back, disputing the idea that a, quote, nearly flawless campaign that outspent the opposition 3-1 could not have won the election. Personally, I take some comfort from the fact that elections are purely decided by whoever has the most money to spend. That may be the opposite of comfort if it was your side that spent the money and lost. I agree. Critics of Harris's campaign are saying that it was undermined by internal confusion and a lack of clear decision-making hierarchy. My impression is that both sides are wrong, lacking the needy perspective that will only come about once the dust has settled. The fact is that Americans were deeply unhappy with the impacts on their lives from inflation. They were worried about the culture war stuff, the alienation of young men from having a positive role in society, the idea of weird gender stuff being imposed on their children. That trans issue particularly played well for Trump. They tested out the advert they produced with the tagline, "Kamala is for they, them, President Trump is for you." It performed so well in testing, his campaign were reportedly stunned and made sure to get it out widely across swing states. It highlighted how Democrats just don't talk like ordinary people. Not only did they talk differently, but they scolded you if you didn't do likewise. And they would punish even school children who didn't fit what seemed to be strange and rapidly changing rules. Ezra Klein, who is one of the few liberal commentators who dared to speak up about Biden's obvious decline before anyone else dared to, he said this: "I do think a lot of Democrats have alienated themselves from the culture that many people, and particularly many men, now consume. I think they lost people like Joe Rogan by rejecting them, and it was a terrible mistake." Joe Rogan was, of course, endorsing Bernie Sanders only 4 years ago, but he was treated by the Democrats as a pariah for failing to speak only to guests that they would approve of, amongst other transgressions. Well, if you leave a vacuum, especially one with an audience of millions of people, it's going to get filled by the other side. So yes, Trump went onto his podcast. J.D. Vance went onto his podcast. Kamala Harris did not. So that helped. Ultimately, in between his self-indulgences, which uniquely failed to dent his appeal with his supporters, Trump campaigned on issues that affected most Americans, such as the economy, such as immigration. Whether you agree with his messages on those issues or not, they were key issues for large numbers of voters. The Democrats, on the other hand, did what in recent years the Democrats have often done: packaged up their target audience and told them what they think they wanted to hear, and were hence often felt to be taking those audiences for granted. If you were black, you were assumed to have certain beliefs by default. Similarly, if you were Latino. For example, if you were Latino, you were supposed to embrace being called Latinx on some weird gender-neutral principle. And secondly, you were supposed to be in favour of illegal immigration. Trump gained support amongst Latinos. Many of them testified they hated being called Latinx, and having entered America as legal immigrants and committed themselves to advancement based on hard work, they rejected the idea of illegal immigrants being allowed in and popularly believed to be getting generous benefits that enabled them not to work. It was just one example of how you claim to speak for a group and alienate them by getting it wrong, at least for a sizable number of them. The biggest group in the Democrat coalition was women generally, who they talked to about abortion. And by all accounts, many women do care about abortion, did in this election, but with the issue having been pushed to the states, there were a number of places where abortion was literally on the ballot, which meant that women could split their votes, vote for abortion rights at the same time as voting for Trump. Some of them did just that, and the numbers of white women voting for Trump went up significantly in this election, challenging the core electoral beliefs that Democrats had built their foundations upon. Trump did better with all of those groups than he had done before, because he was talking about things they cared about inflation, about American jobs, and all of that. Relatively universal issues, not just the fringe issues that Democrats allotted to different group identities. Maybe you think, and there are good arguments for this, that what Trump was saying on those topics was magical thinking at best, and he was very unlikely to deliver on any of them. That people had to be delusional to believe Trump's easy solutions. But that wasn't the counter that the Harris campaign was particularly making. They were instead too busy calling him a threat to democracy, a convicted felon, and in the last week a full-on Nazi fascist. As noted by the pollsters, that was messaging that didn't land when the Biden campaign did it, so it's kind of puzzling why they defaulted to it at the end of the Harris campaign. The other point is that people were just fed up of the incumbents, and they wanted change. All the elections so far in 2024, and there have been a lot, have seen incumbents losing percentage share way more so than has typically been normal. Now that didn't have to work so hard against Democrats. Kamala Harris had started off positioning herself as the change candidate, being as both Trump and Biden had recently been in office. But then she went on The View, and when she was asked what she would have done differently to Biden, she said she couldn't think of anything. Reportedly, Trump advisors were stunned that she didn't have a good answer to such an obvious question. And again, they used that clip in as much advertising and social media promotion as they could to paint Harris as the continuity candidate. And the result we now know. In the aftermath, some Harris supporters have been making exactly the same mistakes in their excuses for why they lost. Will a woman ever be US president? One newspaper columnist agonized. Others said Harris didn't win because of misogyny and racism. Post-Barack Obama, this is a weird throwback to grievance politics. Obama was elected because he did not go on about being black, certainly in his first election. He spoke to people in terms of universal themes about aspiration for the future, and he did this extremely well. For race and sex not to be an issue, you have to stop putting it in as your central focus and talk to people about their problems. In the UK, the left habitually labelled the Conservative Party as racist and sexist in exactly the same way. Well, the Conservative Party recently elected a black woman as its leader. The fourth woman, by the way, having started in the 1970s with Margaret Thatcher. They did so because her skills were rated highly and her political positioning won the support of the party base. Meritocracy doesn't guarantee a win, but the opposite almost certainly guarantees a loss. One good thing for America is that all those people who were poised and ready to go into full throttle, spreading stories and innuendo claiming that the election was stolen, all fell extremely silent very quickly. As it was, we did still get an echo of all that, because people have developed habits that are hard to kick. So some people were circulating the voting numbers, noting how much higher the voting number was for the previous election, and suggesting that this proved that the previous election had been stolen. Well, no. The numbers being circulated were incomplete. They were before huge numbers of votes had finally been counted. If you go by the expected final numbers, it's slightly down this year, but only slightly. There have also been Democrats on Twitter who were similarly taking those numbers and saying it suggested something fishy was going on in this election, and that Kamala shouldn't have conceded. And of course the answer is the same response. Wait for the final tallies. At least in their case it's only a Twitter fringe, to be fair, not the actual candidate as it was with Trump in 2020. What happens next? Well, the first and most obvious thing, pretty much all of Trump's legal problems just go away. The federal charges cannot be pursued, they will disappear, and it is simply not going to happen that the president-elect or the sitting president, once he's been inaugurated, is going to be sent to jail by a state court. Trump gambled everything on his push to the White House, and he won that gamble. Technically, the state prosecutions could defer trial or appeal till after he's completed his term, but since all the energy behind those trials was to seek to stop him achieving exactly what he's achieved, the most spectacular own goal in history, by the way, since his campaign only started to pick up momentum when those first indictments were brought, it's pretty unlikely to happen. Go after an 82-year-old two-term former president so many years after the alleged crimes took place? Not likely to happen. As for what else comes next, well, the media and YouTube and everywhere else is full of speculation that is exactly just that, speculation. The truth is, you simply don't know what Trump will actually decide to do, regardless of what he said he would do. After all, he said Hillary Clinton would be in jail in 2016 and then laughed it off over the election. Since then, of course, he's been pursued by Democrats trying to put him in jail. So we might expect some differences in how he responds this time, especially with at least 2 years of having a supportive Congress to work with. I don't really see the point of lots of breathless, well, he might do this, he might do that type stuff. We will find out soon enough. In the UK, of course, we are mostly obsessed about our own stuff, interpreting Trump's victory solely in the light of it. So, for example, we have the Tory-supporting media who are trying to embarrass Labour by calling attention to all the figures, not least for Foreign Secretary David Lammy, who has said unpleasant things about Trump in the past. The fact that if Trump goes ahead with universal tariffs, as he has promised, that would damage the UK's interests is not part of that joyous narrative just yet. I expect they'll find a way to blame it on Keir Starmer should it come to pass in any case. What else will happen next? I will make certain predictions based on what I know, or at least what I think I know. Trump's second term will be substantively different to the first. In the first couple of years, he will be more confident and less restrained, clearer of what he wants to achieve. That may have some pluses, it will also have some big minuses. Trump has learned some lessons since his first term, but he shows no interest in governing per se. So while it will be different, his administration will nevertheless be probably as chaotic as his first one. Trump's delusions that he only has to inhabit the White House for the world's dictators to become too afraid to start or prosecute a war, that is not going to survive his second term. He will not solve the Ukraine war on his first day of taking office, or indeed within his first month. If called out on that, he'll just blame Vladimir Zelensky. You might think it's weird to tell everyone you have a plan that will definitely solve a war on day one if it turns out your plan is not acceptable to one or both of the parties. And it is indeed, but that's the world we are once again living in. That said, the almost certain refusal of Trump's America to support Ukraine militarily will ultimately lead to Putin's partial victory based on territory currently occupied. America will be seen by everyone as an unreliable ally because of that and various other transactional plays that Trump will make. That already happened, to be fair, as soon as it dawned on people that America was quite likely, or even capable, of electing him back for a second term, which happened a couple of years ago. What it says is that this polarised country can swing wildly in terms of its foreign policy positions from election to election. For most of recent history, you would find that while domestic policies of a government could be radically different, the logic of self-interest often meant that foreign and defence policy remained broadly the same throughout changes in elections. No longer. More predictions. Within the next 4 years, Trump will fall out with Robert Kennedy Jr. He will fall out with Elon Musk. Probably won't fall out with Susie Wiles, his new chief of staff. You might ask why. Because she has shown that she's loyal to Trump, although she will tell him when she thinks he's wrong, which is exactly what he needs and he values from her. She also does not seek fame, does not seek credit, unlike the walking egos on legs that are Kennedy and Musk. Trump cannot bear other people getting ideas above themselves and seeking to be famous in his orbit. For that reason, Kennedy will not survive, Musk will not survive. It may take a while, perhaps especially for Elon Musk, who remains useful to Trump for longer, thanks to his businesses and his reach on Twitter. But I would be pretty surprised if they reached the end of the term on good terms. Musk and the other tech bros who've been throwing money at Trump did so thinking they could influence him and take the edge off his craziness. Will Elon Musk persuade Trump not to dismantle America's scientific institutions? If Project 2025 has any sway, America may become the first advanced nation to actually dismantle its climate data gathering and analysis operation. Maybe one of the tech bros will find a way to explain why that would be a bad idea. Maybe. Lots of people think they can manipulate Trump. We're going to learn which ones can and which ones can't. President Vladimir Putin thinks that he's another one who can. He's already been handing out generous praise to Trump's courage and his success, all the flattery that Trump is known to be susceptible to. Putin had said earlier that Trump's plan for ending the Ukraine war deserved to be taken seriously and so on, but he has also said it does not mean that he will accept any abandonment of his territorial ambitions, and of course neither will Ukraine accept giving up territory. What Putin will be seeking, though, will be Trump's allyship in his rehabilitation with the wider global community. If America drops its sanctions, if Trump and Putin meet for a summit, Putin will have made another step in normalizing armed aggression against neighbors as a tool of statecraft. I won't predict whether he'll get his wish, but it's undoubtedly true that the opportunity now exists, depending on how he manages to play his cards. Alright, that's enough hostages to fortune for one video. Whatever the next 4 years will bring, I think the safest prediction of all is they won't be boring.